Wait, I need you both to do something in the wild. Okay, you have to bring in some energy, and you're young boys, so you will flex your muscles and scream like you just did in the wild. Ready?
Okay.
3, 2, 1.
Look at my biceps.
Wow. Yeah.
Ready?
Are we done?
Yes.
Oh my God, I think I sprained a muscle. just doing that.
Too much exertion.
Okay. So do we start?
Yeah.
We rolling?
All cameras rolling.
Try to welcome.
Your phone silent.
Okay. Welcome to Everything is Everything. We are recording this episode in Ajay Shah's house. Makeshift this thing because in our last episode you heard about how I had a minor health incident, and because of that we shot one episode at my place. Today we are at Ajay's residence, and I want to begin this episode by testing my friend's math skills. Ajay keeps telling people that my math is good. I should have been a mathematician. Is that really true? Can we, we have to test it. Trust but verify. And I trust you, but I will verify this.
It is my lifetime regret. I wish I was a mathematician.
You wish you were a mathematician, but your math skills are good, you claim, right? That's for every economist, they should be decent, right?
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. What is the sum of the squares of the first 4 primes?
1, 2, 3, 5.
No. Leaving aside 1.
Okay. 2, 3, 5, 7.
What is the sum of the squares of the
So
first?
4, 9, 13, 25, 38. Did I add correctly? Plus 49. 38 plus 49. That.
Comes to?
Yeah.
Comes to what?
89 minus 2, 87.
Welcome to episode 87 of Everything is Everything. I'm glad you got there. Took a little bit of time. So, Ajay Shah, before we begin this episode, you are going to be put through a rigorous test.
Okay.
Right? Here
So
is
you
a
already
test.
tested me with one multiplication problem.
Which you passed.
Addition
I need to
problem.
put you through a test, another test, and see if you pass that as well. And
Okay.
if you pass that, we'll put you through another test and
So-
see if you pass that. You're getting the...
Adding is a fundamental unit of our discussion today. So I've done adding.
And multiplying. You had to multiply
today.
7 by 7, 5 by 5.
Okay, yeah.
Correct? Yeah, or it's so trivial for you, you don't think of multiplying as a problem. Addition में problem होता है, multiplication ठीक है. Is that the kind of student you are? Anyway, you have had your way with many episodes of Everything is Everything, where you have said, Amit, today we will do an episode on firms. And I'm like, okay. And then you do an episode on firms. And then 10 days later, you're like, Amit, we'll do an episode on firms. And I'm like, okay. And then you do an episode on firms. And God knows how many episodes on firms you've gotten away with. And other interesting subjects like bankruptcy regulation. So you are not just going to get to do an episode like that, right? I'm going to interview you. And you have to
pitch it to you.
You have to pitch it to me, not so much an elevator pitch, but across
Amit,
table pitch.
today I want to do another episode on
No,
firms.
wait, we'll begin. Name. Applicant's name.
Moore's laws.
No, that's, you are the applicant. Is your name Moore's Laws?
Oh, name. Ajay Shah.
My father was Mr. Laws. So you're not Moore's Laws, you're Ajay Shah. Age.
59.
Occupation.
YouTuber.
Okay, I like that. Okay, what do you want to do your episode today on?
Moore's laws.
Why?
Because it connects to firms.
You win.
Okay, I'll do better.
Yes.
There's a great wild west wind tearing through this modern world, and it is called CPUs. And CPUs were forged out of a law of technological progress, which is called Moore's law. It is important for us to understand the causes and consequences. There is a plural in the episode title, Moore's laws, because we're actually going to look at other ways of thinking about technological progress, which is the ultimate wild west wind that has reshaped this world for the last 500 years.
No, and I love the subject. The subject passes, but not because it is about technology, which of course is great, but also I think it reveals a lot about human beings as well, and our fundamental drive towards innovation and progress, which is often understated or even not appreciated by many people. So well done, Mr. Shah. You have passed on both accounts. Further tests will be posed to you after the shooting of this episode.
Thank you, sir. Do I have to submit the form in triplicate?
Yes, why not? Since we are at it, please submit the form in triplicate and physical copies. All right, Ajay. So, jokes aside, let's go.
I want to start at just summarizing the standard knowledge and getting all of us on the same page about Moore's law. Moore's law is expressed in a couple of different ways. I don't want to get into the history. I want to protect our time. In essence, it is the claim that the number of transistors on a chip doubles every 18 months. Okay, so just think that we make a transistor. It's a thing with 3 prongs, first made in 1947, assembled by hand at Bell Labs. And then came the pressure for doing more. That can you make more complex circuits? The most important customers of this were space research. So NASA was desperate. They wanted to put small compact pieces of equipment up in a satellite. So NASA funding literally created the industry where people were pushing to make more complex things, where on a single die you would put multiple transistors together, and these are called integrated circuits. And the phrase is ICs. So an IC is an integrated circuit. It's a little piece of plastic on which multiple transistors are placed. Then you get to VLSI, very large scale integration, where you really start putting large numbers of transistors on a single chip. And this led up to a great milestone in world history, which is the Intel 4004. Okay, so the Intel 4004 was the world's first CPU on a single chip. Prior to that, a CPU was a room-sized thing. This was micro-miniaturized to the point where it was one single tiny integrated circuit. And for all ye callow, gentle readers that are used to squandering like billions of transistors in the CPUs on your phones, I will have you know that the Intel 4004 had something like 2300 transistors. Okay, so I want you to pause to think of the madness of it. You get an entire CPU in 2300 transistors. That's it. Like we use the transistors to make some gates, and the full CPU is done in 2300 transistors. So at heart, a CPU is a Turing machine. It needs to know how to fetch a memory cell into a register. It needs to know how to add. So addition is a very important skill, and it needs to have an if to be able to branch. Everything else is toppings, but in essence you have to be able to do these 3 things. So in 2300 transistors you're doing the whole thing. That we're getting an opcode. We're able to think about, oh, you want me to do addition, and then a bunch of gates fire into action, and the addition gets done all in a piddly 2300 transistors. Okay, that is sheer magic. Let's say Intel 4004. From that point onwards, the world got into an insane loop of, on average, there are subtleties, 1965 to 1975. I just want to stick to a rough bumper sticker that everybody should know, which is that the number of transistors on a chip has doubled on average every 18 months. So about every 1.5 years, you get a doubling in the number of transistors. This was written in a paper by Gordon Moore in 1965. I want to show you 2 beautiful graphics. In this graphic, I'm showing you 5 of the components which were used in the 7 components that made his paper. So all you need is 7 good data points to get a world-changing observation. Okay, and we're showing you a picture of 5 of the chips, and you see the complexity of the chips going up. And he saw this pattern, and he had the idea that let's think deeply about this and hypothesize what is going on. This is not a physics law, right? There's no deeper reason why this ought to happen. It's not a physical fact about the universe. It's a social fact. It's an economic fact. It's an economic law that we are able to pile on the innovations and the capital intensity so that the number of transistors on a chip roughly doubles every 18 months. And now I want to show you a second graph. This is a graph of a long time series of a variety of different CPUs through decades. This thing has just gone on. This fire has been burning and burning all around us. And this is called a semi-log graph because the y-axis is in log scale. Equal distances on the y-axis correspond to a 10-fold rise. So it's not a normal graph. And so the sweet engineering speak for this graph is straight lines on a semi-log graph. So the x-axis is time, the y-axis is something expressed in log scale. It's called a semi-log graph. That the x-axis is not in log, that would be a log-log graph. The x-axis is on time in linear scale. The y-axis is some object of interest, in this case the number of transistors per chip, and it's expressed in log scale, and you get a straight line in that, which is basically you're getting a tenfold rise every few years, and that every x years you're getting a 10x, a 10x, a 10x, and these are just amazing phenomena when they happen. So we have been in the grip of Moore's law for decades, and the CPUs have just gotten better to the point where we have normalized this. We think billions of transistors is just normal, and I just want to pause and say, like, my God, what an achievement. Like, what amazing people, what wonderful things. And so, today we're going to think a little more about the causes and consequences and how firms make progress, how productivity growth arises, and a little bit thinking about countries and so on.
And there's this old parable about this king who is very pleased with someone. So he asks him that, ask for your reward, you shall receive. And this guy says, okay, listen, there's a chessboard in front of you. Give me 1 grain of rice for the first square, A1. Give me another grain of rice for the second square. Give me double it for the second square, double that for the third square. So, so on down the line. And do it for the entire board. And the king says, what is the problem? We are starting with 1 grain, but then eventually it becomes something mad, more grains than the atoms in the universe or something. And
2 raised to 64 is like 10 raised to 19.
Hmm.
So if you think that a grain is like 0.1 grams, then it's 10 raised to minus 4 kg. So this is 2 raised to 15 kg.
Which is what?
The mass of the earth is 10 raised to 25 kg. So this is like
more than the earth.
10 raised to minus 10 of the mass of the earth, which is well beyond the resources of any king.
Correct. But is it more than the earth? Doesn't matter. It's a lot of grain. It's what you're going to do. How many chickens you're going to feed with that produce, as it were. No, it's a lovely story. And even log graphs, I find them fascinating. Bollywood has always been fascinated by log graphs. Are you aware of this? There are songs about it.
No, I didn't know.
Kuch to log kahenge. Logo ka kaam hai kehna. And then there's another famous song. Vaishnav is no doubt knows this. He sings it beautifully sometimes in the evenings when we are in the mood. Inhi logo ne. So Ajay, tell me about the implications of this. The doubling is happening. My intuition is that, that A, on the one hand, humanity has seen more progress in the last 50 years than in all of human history before it. And B, that a lot of this is to do with, technology enabled by Moore's law. So give me a sense of what it did to the modern world.
So first, for just the simple glory and the madness of it, that computation became ubiquitous, computation became cheap. Okay, you can get like mind-blowing CPUs at a price like $1 or 10 cents, which you can afford to waste. You can put them in a toaster. You can just put them everywhere. So there is no limit to the engineering ingenuity that we can put these chips everywhere. And today there can be a backend in the cloud, and there can be computation at the edge. Small chips can work inside innumerable kinds of cleverness, and it is a bounty of capability which has been like the single great thing sweeping our modern world and endlessly giving us ideas and innovation. So I want to put this in comparison against the difficulties of pre-electronics engineering, pre-CPU engineering. Consider a car. Okay, here are two triumphs of mechanical cars. One is cruise control. Okay, so you are on the Mumbai Trans Harbour Link, MTHL, and it's got a speed limit of 100 kph, and they have serious video cameras that if you are at 110 or 120, they'll take a picture of your car and you'll get a ticket. Okay, so this has been enforced, and I find it incredibly tedious to like keep my car at 100, not be at 95, not be at 105, keep it at 100, and that's done using a little gizmo that is called cruise control. Now, in the olden days, this was a mechanical contrivance where like the pedal would be fixed and it would be set to a certain target velocity, and this was done as the height of mechanical engineering. But once you have CPUs, it's a trivial bit of code. While one do, if your velocity is above 101, ease it up a little. If your velocity is less than 99, then push it up a little. It's a trivial bit of code that can be put on an Intel 4004, which today costs nothing. So great feats of engineering got replaced by a little bit of software, and you can just roll this out. You needed very clever people to invent cruise control, whereas writing it in software is something trivial. Similarly, automatic transmission. Okay, in cars, automatic transmission was just something great. It was a height of human ingenuity. But you can readily see a point at which you just put some small code around it that based on my elevation and my velocity, choose an appropriate gear. It's a trivial, 20-line program. Once you shift from a mechanical engineering worldview to a computational worldview, these things become easy. So things that were very, very hard became trivial because we could put them into software, and that was really a great place to be. I want to distinguish this from another kind of progress, which is not a Moore's law kind of progress, just for us to be very clear. Consider lighting technology. In lighting technology, we went from candles to gas lamps to tungsten bulbs to fluorescent lighting with fluorescent tubes and then bulbs, and then we came to LEDs, and it has added up to a mind-blowing change. When you're burning a candle, almost all the energy is turning into heat. By the time you are at an LED, almost all the energy is turning into light. Okay, we've gone from probably 9% efficiency to 90% efficiency, to the point where really there is no great headroom left to improve lighting technology, because LED bulbs are essentially 90% there. They make 10% heat or less, and so we're finished. Imagine the journey of lighting technology is over. But that's not a Moore's law story, because they're discontinuous jumps, and then there's a period of stagnation. Then there's a discontinuous jump, and there's a period of stagnation. When tungsten bulbs came, it was a jump to a certain lighting technology, and then there was progress in terms of improving the life of the bulb, but for the rest, the basic technology did not change. Okay, so many fields go through these non-differentiable episodes, but that's not the idea of Moore's law. What we are describing as Moore's law is just this madness of grinding away year after year. The damn thing gets better, and you get straight lines in semi-log graphs. Finally, I want to turn a little bit to the actual content of what happens inside a CPU. Just because the number of transistors on a CPU double every 18 months on average, it doesn't actually make the CPUs to 2x faster every 18 months. Okay, so to put this in historical context, CPUs emerged around a simple model of a computer. There's a famous machine made by Digital Equipment Corporation called the PDP-11. So the metaphor in our mind is a PDP-11. It is a single-threaded computer. It has one memory store. You fetch things into a register. There's a finite set of opcodes, and that's the metaphor that we ran on for a long time. Now, that metaphor chokes rapidly, because even if you make the CPU faster, you put more transistors into it. Most of the time, this thing is just waiting because it is doing a fetch from outside, and it rapidly ran out of juice. Then people innovated the hell out of this to try to make it better. Let me give you a flavor of the innovation that happens in a modern CPU. So imagine you have an if condition. So if x is less than 3, we're going to do this. If x is more than 3, we're going to do this. What modern CPUs do is they start computing both branches, saying we'll figure out later on whether x was actually less than 3 or not. So they look ahead. They look at the code ahead, and they do speculative branch prediction, and they'll go off in one direction, and they'll spend energy and computation doing both, because by the time you discover that x is 3, you don't want to compute this. So incredible effort has gone in to taking a PDP-11 model and making it faster. But really, there are limits on how far you will go. So we've got about 10x with all these tricks, but it's maxed out. You really can't use transistors anymore to make the CPUs faster. And the most perfect answer to this is the GPU. So the essence of a GPU is I'm going to put 1000 parallel computers on one chip. So I'm using my transistors. I know how to cram billions of transistors on a chip, and I'm going to put 1000 small CPUs on that, which do some specialized operations. And I'm telling the human, Mr. Human, you be smart. You learn how to use my 1,000 CPUs. And we're not trying to have a PDP-11 metaphor and make a CPU faster. So I just want to be careful that there is a slip between cup and lip. Just adding transistors doesn't make your CPUs faster. And modern general purpose CPUs have not got the gains of Moore's law. We have not doubled general purpose CPUs every 18 months. But then you have to think differently, and GPUs are the most perfect expression of the resolution of that crisis.
So I have an observation and a question, and the observation is that what you just described about these two different kinds of progress, where you just keep doubling the transistors and it happens every 18 months more or less, and you just that's a steady path. And then there is this continuous where you make what one could say are quantum leaps. Yes. And I think of learning also like that you can actually learn in two ways. One way of learning a subject or a skill or whatever is that it is a continuous flow, you're just adding on to your craft. And the other is that it's not really continuous. You make a quantum leap either in understanding or in skill, then you refine, then you make another quantum leap, and so on and so forth. And it's useful, I think, to think of, the different places where these two kinds of learnings apply, learning to learn being a core skill that we shall all need to know in the new millennium, as it were. And by the way, Life Lessons, our course, has a couple of modules on learning how to learn. That's up. See, clever plug, Ajay Shah, always sort of do clever plugs, as it were. My question for you is this. I love automatic transmission, right? I am the best driver in Bombay partly because automatic transmission allows me to take my mind off one particular thing, which is when to shift the gears and all that, onto another thing, which is optimal lane shifting, which is what makes me the best driver in Bombay. But often I will have these car snobs who will say, nahi yaar, manual wali feel nahi hai, right? And they'll be like, it's manual is a superior experience. And I don't kind of get this snobbery at all. To me, automatic transmission is miraculous. Why do you want to spend mental energy and bandwidth on changing gears? I mean, even if it becomes reflexive, just why do it? Especially in a stop and start traffic of Mumbai, it's just a pain in the ass. So what is your feeling on this deeply ideological question akin to the Oxford comma and the semicolon? What do you feel about manual transmission and the purity of the craft, as it were?
So I first discovered cruise control because my friend Sharad Mathur installed cruise control on his car by himself. Okay, and he was a car geek, he loved cars, and he said that he could get up from 0 to 100 kph in a lower number of seconds with manual transmission compared to what automatic transmission could do. So, if you are an aficionado, if you are the kind of person that will like to go racing in the street, then probably manual transmission is better for you. Whereas if you treat something just as in an instrumental way, that this is the way in which I go to my coffee shop, then you probably don't want to be bothered.
So, before I get to my question for this chapter, a mini rant, which is that whenever new technology comes up, there will be people on the left who will argue this will increase inequality. The haves will have more of it, the have-nots will not. To which I always ask for evidence. And I say, tell me when this happened. Because technology to me levels a playing field. It is a great equalizer. You look at how GPS starts, when the government funds it and it is only for space and military purposes. And then it goes to, say, luxury high-end cars, BMWs and all that. A very small number of people can use it. And today it's available with everyone. AI today can be used by anyone. All technology eventually has this great, democratizing effect, as it were. The cell phone that I use is not very different from the cell phone Elon Musk uses. We all have, technology in that sense is a great equalizer. And part of the beauty of this revolution is how prices come down. So that's what I want to ask you about. That fine, you keep doubling the transistors on a chip, and obviously like rice grains on a chessboard, it completely goes out of whack. And my intuition is that therefore prices also come down enormously. Tell me more about that.
And this is why I want to use the title for this episode as Moore's laws in plural, as opposed to just Moore's law, which we've already finished, which is on average in about 18 months, we get a doubling of the number of transistors on a chip. If you went from 2300 transistors to 2.3 billion transistors on a CPU, and if alongside that, the price of that resultant marvel was like $1 million, it would be no fun. It would be an obscure, exotic technology that is of interest to a few people, maybe some military applications. What is equally mind-blowing is the price gains that have taken place. And I would like to push this as another concept of Moore's law. It's a different kind of Moore's law, where you don't put a number of transistors on the y-axis, but you put some performance per price measure, you put some price measure. And then again, on log scale with time on the x-axis, in a semi-log graph, do you get a straight line? Okay. And the amazing thing is we got that, and not just around CPUs, but in many, many fields. So I just want to distinguish this, that you could have a technical parameter on the y-axis, which is the standard Moore's law, but maybe 5x more important is when you start getting those price gains. And let me show you some examples of these kinds of things happening. Take solar panels. Okay, so we've got mind-blowing gains in the price of a solar panel. Solar panels began as exotic technology that was put up on satellites in outer space. Because you wanted to take energy from the sun, your choice was either a plutonium battery or solar cells. And plutonium batteries did not get that great price reduction, but solar cells did. Or consider the price of bandwidth. Okay, today all of us find it normal to have anything from 10 megabits a second to 100 megabits a second. We don't even notice anymore. There was a time when this stuff was exotic. When I was a PhD student in America, an entire university, the University of Southern California, ran on a T1 line, which was considered the height of cool. It was something like 1.5 megabits a second. An entire university ran on 1.5 megabits a second. And today all of us get 300 MB per second from an ACT or something at a price lower than what was paid for a T1 line so many years ago. Okay, or consider lithium-ion batteries. Consider the cost of lobbing a satellite into near Earth orbit. Okay, so think of the price per kilo of sending stuff into orbit. So there was one great period in the beginning in the 60s and 70s where there was a big gain in the prices of sending things up into orbit. Then there was a long stagnation, and now we've got private sector energy innovating in this space, coming up with newer ideas, and also the bounty of modern electronics is being applied to these problems. Electronics and computers enables better design. Electronics and computers makes it possible to catch a rocket when it comes back. So this is further giving you a next wave of gains for the cost of shipping things into near Earth orbit. People are predicting numbers like $10 per kg. Just imagine, for $10 you can toss something into near Earth orbit. So these are all examples of Moore's law style phenomena, where a price is on the y-axis. And as an economist, I just want to say that's the whole enchilada. You got to get the prices down, like not just technical capabilities, get us revolutions in prices. And so it is that we go again and again. Larry Summers tells this story of the most dramatic technical change of his life. I think it was at the time of the 1992 United States elections. Larry Summers was an advisor to Michael Dukakis, and there was a Democratic convention, I think in Chicago. And he remembers that he stepped into a car which had been sent to pick him up, and the car had a phone. And he was so surprised. He had never seen a phone in a car before. And he picked up the phone and called his wife, and he said, "You know what? I'm calling you from a car." It was that level of madness. And he says a scant 1.5 years later, he was crossing a river in Africa, and somebody handed him a GSM phone saying, "This call is for you." He says it took 1.5 years to reach from some exotic technology in America to a river crossing in Africa. That is the way this stuff got democratized, and it went all over the world.
I have two examples of exactly this from my own life. Now, in the last episode, you'll remember I told you about the first of the two startups I tried and why that failed and timing and etc. etc. Let me tell you about the second one and how that sent me into debt. Right, that was around the time, the middle of 2000, the Nasdaq crash has happened. The people who said they'll invest in that previous company kind of backed out. Everything kind of fell apart. And Kaun Banega Crorepati was just becoming a hit. So what I did was I figured that I want to create some immersive content online, and I created a game called Crore Master, which had a quiz master called Babu Moshai, quite cheesy. And I was a hardcore quizzer, so I got quizzing friends and paid them money to get a bank of thousands and thousands of questions. And I gamified the whole experience. So it would ask you one question, then it would give you a response according to your answer. Maybe it would give you clues, and then you would go on to the next question, and so on and so forth. And we even figured out ways to eventually monetize it. We said we can let people play through the telephone company, which was MTNL, VSNL at that time, that it can be added to the telephone bill, the amount they are playing with, and that, you can eventually fund it. At one point, Star had a digital branch based in Bangalore, and they were suddenly very interested by this when this took off, and they, even said, we'll buy it. I forget the figure, 50 lakhs or a crore, some dinky figure. But for us at that time, a couple of individuals, it was a lot of money, but that fell through because they shut down, because, effects of the NASDAQ crash. How did we go into debt? We went into debt for this reason, that because it was interactive, that you as a user would answer a question and there's a ping back to the server, and then the server responds accordingly. We needed the server to be as close to the source as possible. So we decided we will host on VSNL rather than host somewhere abroad. And VSNL then had a policy that they charged you according to traffic. They charged you according to the traffic you brought onto the site. The more the traffic, the more you paid. And the game went madly viral because, of course, I designed it beautifully. And there was 1 month where we were the #2 site in India. Now, I don't remember which was 1 and which was 3, but we were between Rediff and Cricinfo. Just 1 month, that's it. But that 1 month bankrupted us and took us hugely into debt because we were paying according to the traffic. And that's simultaneously Star noticed, and they were like, oh, we'll buy you, this is a good spin-off with our game. The game was called Crore Master, and the overall site I was building was called mindfever.com, where we were building other interactive games. Year 2000, none of it exists now in any form or shape, not even written about. But we had to shut down after like 3 months, and I just ended up owing a lot of money because we were successful in getting traffic and we were successful in user acquisition. So go figure the irony. Today, something like this for a startup is unthinkable. That no one's scared of a lot of traffic today. No one wants to figure out how do we handle this. No one is paying according to the traffic. And the second story is a story that you might even be too old for, but people who fall into sort of my age group, you're young when the internet is being born, will remember dial-up connections and the ka sound of the dial-up connection, which you are hearing now, right? And how you'd have half a picture of Samantha Fox and suddenly your connection disconnects and you're listening to ka while the screen says buffering. Just as you are seeing now, gentle reader, we are so smart. And yeah, imagine that was what those times were. And today it's like unbelievable. Free broadband, effectively free broadband is effectively ubiquitous, just mind-blowing.
Yeah, no, I do come from the world where I could listen to the negotiation of the modem and I would know which protocol it got through.
Oh, Jesus Christ. Too much. So Ajay, besides Moore's laws, give me some more frameworks which will help me think about tech progress.
There are three rival views of the world. There are also a couple of others which are less important. There are three rival views of the world on what happens in the journey to technological progress. We've already discussed Moore's law, where there would be something on the y-axis which is like a technical measure or a price measure. On the x-axis would be time, and you'd get a log scale, you'd get a straight line in a semi-log graph. Okay. There are two other important rival theories about the world that everybody ought to know. The second one is called Wright's law, WRIGHT. Okay. Oddly enough, this is something made by a person in 1936, and he was not one of the Wright brothers, but he came up with this idea while studying the manufacturing of planes. Okay. What is the idea? This is a focus on volume, and I want to use the word volume as we do around poker or around chess. The idea is that you get productivity gains based on your lifetime volume. So how many cars have you ever made? How many planes have you ever made? You add up your lifetime experience on how many cars you have made, and you get a semi-log graph in that. That as the volumes go up linearly, you get a semi-log graph, and a crude thumb rule that when this works well, and I'm going to come back to caveats in a moment, is that for each doubling in the aggregative lifetime volume, you get a 20% gain in productivity. Okay, this is an interesting idea, not time, volume. You put in volume and you will get improvements. And this is also called a learning curve, it's called an experience curve. But it is a very interesting idea that there is learning by doing. The more you do it, the better you get. And as I say, a rough frontier, and I don't want to overstate this, is about every doubling you get a 20% gain in productivity. A doubling of what? Of your lifetime work. So if you are a company that has made 10 million cars, then your next 10 million cars will give you a 20% gain in productivity just out of the learning process, because you went from 10 million cars to 20 million cars. You did one doubling in the grand total number of parts that you ever made, and you get a productivity gain in return for.
So basically, when we make episode 174, we'll be 20% better than we are now.
Correct. Yeah, the bulk of the gains are early. So when we went from ep 1 to 10 and 10 to 20, we put in a doubling there. And our productivity should have gone up by about 20%. And you know what? I think that it did. We were in that kind of
Massive, yeah.
frenetic learning in the early stages, and now the learning rate has gone down. Okay. And the third and last important rival that I want to put up for this discussion is called Goddard's law, which is the claim that you get productivity gains based on scale as measured in per year production. Okay. So how many EPs do you make per year? Volume doesn't count. Your history doesn't count. Just per year, if you make more cars, you get economies of scale. Okay. So in Goddard's law, on the x-axis is annual production. In Wright's law, on the x-axis is grand total output that you've ever produced. And in Moore's law, the x-axis is time. Interesting. And in all three, the claim is on the right hand side, you'll put some technical parameter of productivity or some economic measure, some price, some cost, and you will get a semi-log straight line. So these are three rival views of the world, that you get gains in time, you get gains in volume, aggregate lifetime volume, you get gains in annual production, simple economies of scale. So is it learning by doing? Is it simple economies of scale? Is it just time? Again, these are correlated, because if over time you're going to do more volume, then it's indistinguishable between the three. There's a beautiful paper by Nagy et al. In PLOS One in 2013. I'm putting this up on the screen right now, where they did mind-blowing data work. They assembled these productivity curves for 62 industries. So they wandered around the world, and not just CPUs, but they studied 62 different industries, and they compared these three laws, and they compare a bunch of other laws. And the quick answer is Wright's law is the best of the lot. That aggregate lifetime volume is the most important predictor. Isn't that cool? So this is a lovely tool for thinking that I think everybody should know, which is think of a person, think of a firm in terms of their lifetime output. That if you have been a cobbler and you have repaired 53,000 shoes in your life, you are standing on something great. This is kind of the story of, doctors in India seeing a very high number of patients. That volume, the sheer volume that they put in has driven their skill, and that's the right way to think about it.
And this is not just useful to think about in terms of technology or firms. I feel for the creator economy, this is the core truth. I keep talking about the importance of a bias for action for creators. Do. I'm reminded of this experiment I keep citing, but I've forgotten the details of the experiment. But basically, funda is this, that the people carrying it out made two groups, and they told one group that you have 1 month to create the perfect pot, but you can only make one pot. So you plan it, you craft it, you make the perfect pot in 1 month. The other group was told, you make 10 pots a day, right? And let's see what is the best pot that you come up with. And as you would guess, the pot that the group making one pot a month came up with was mediocre, while these guys very quickly passed that standard and started making really good pots. So the point is not, many creators get stuck because they will be in this whole loop of thinking about, oh, I will make the perfect blog, the perfect YouTube show, the perfect episode. But the key to first of all, perfection is the enemy of production. You shouldn't even think of that. But the key to excellence is not to spend forever over trying to make something perfect, but doing. And then your baseline level gets so high that excellence automatically emerges.
Yeah. But right away now, I want to put up a bunch of caveats that you should think of this as a frontier, as a production possibility frontier, that when things go right, we will get all these gains in volume. Okay, so Wright's law should not be seen as preordained. that just because your aggregate lifetime volume went up, you're not given a 20% productivity gain in your lap. It comes from purposive action. It comes from effort, meaning you do have to think like this. In the world of business, the word manufacturing excellence is sometimes used, that you need to purposively extract productivity gains out of the process of production. And I am on the board at Britannia, and I have seen this in Britannia. They do a great job, that they've really got a whole philosophy around manufacturing excellence and productivity gains, and year after year they hammer away at making the firm better. And I find it just incredible how year after year they are squeezing out further little gains of energy efficiency, of reducing wastage, and so on. And year after year they are obtaining cost reductions. And so this is a giant company, but which is gaining productivity every year, and they don't have this complacence that we are done, we know how to do this. Okay, so it should be viewed as a frontier, and it's not pure preordained, it's not in the bag. Good firms do it, good teams do it, good creators do it. At its best, Wright's law works, that your aggregative lifetime volume drives up your productivity, but it does require a certain effort and orientation to be intentional about it, to be purposive, saying, you know what, along this way, when I go from 1 million tanks to 2 million tanks, I want to harness those productivity gains, and then you'll run your life in a different way. So now I want to flip this around, and I want to describe 4 characteristics of bad firms, of the kind of firms that go through the volume but don't get the gains. So one kind of firm is a firm where some machines were brought in, probably by some external consultants. Okay, so you got an engineering consultant who told you buy these CNC lathes. So you have a shop floor filled with those CNC lathes, and the firm feels like a bunch of peasants operating these machines, and they haven't thought deeply about the machines. They feel a sense of helplessness. They are in a state of lassitude, that they are not challenging how things are done. They didn't design how things are done. And then you are just in a stagnation, that year after year you're thinking productivity means I have to buy better machines, and one day some consultant will come and I will buy a next batch of machines. Your model of the world is like those non-differentiable jumps, where I went from fluorescent lights to LED lights, and that day will come and some consultant will tell me that that day will come. For the rest, my job is production. Okay, so I think there's a beautiful line, even cowgirls get the blues. The only people who are on routine flights are the people who think that they are on routine flights. Okay, like that. The only people who experience stagnation of productivity as they add volume are the people who are not looking for anything beyond. Okay, so you need that culture that here I am, I have these machines, but I will apply my mind and I will squeeze out a genius of productivity every day. And just because I produced something last year, this year will not be the same. I will do things better this year. There needs to be a whole culture of manufacturing excellence. So this is the first idea, that many firms in India are using world-class machines, and that's great. But alongside that, I often see a certain despondence, that I cannot even imagine how these machines are made, and it is beyond me, and I'm just dumbly operating these machines. And the second part is really inside the firm, that you do need the kind of people who will take interest in this, and then those people have to have the stability, that they are there for long years and they are hammering away at this, and they're getting better at it, and they're getting the joy and the feedback loops of doing it better. Okay, in many bad firms, you just tear up your entire team, people leave, and then a new crew starts, and you've effectively lost that tacit knowledge, which is really the great thing. That what you are after is not a technical measure, that this kind of steel plant generates so many kilograms of steel per joule of energy, but really it is the tacit knowledge in all the people. And so you need to look at people with new eyes, that you need the kind of people who will think, and then those people need to be there, and we have to nourish and nurture our people. And we have to put up these graphs and celebrate when you get straight lines in semi-log graphs. Okay, and another way to see this problem that I have seen in India is many firms are cut to the bone. They are so focused on cost cutting that they've really left no fat. If you do the extremes of cost cutting, then you get like really low quality stuff and you're telling your people shut up and execute. You just have a pure execution orientation. And then you are people on routine flights that you're just day after day, you are doing execution. There is no money, there is no resource, there is no brain available to do something more. Whereas you actually need something more. You need the kind of spending on people, and you need an everyday journey of the debate, the discussion, the strategic thinking, one by one, introducing innovations, introducing modifications. So I think of this as a vicious cycle, that you can run a firm lean, and that firm is kind of efficient in the short term because you've really driven down cost. But when you lack the fat for thinking, for strategy, for innovation, for making mistakes, then actually you don't get on these journeys to quality. Whereas a firm that will additionally spend money on the kind of people, on not having a mere execution orientation, a firm that will have the culture which just does not merely valorize execution, which says to people, shut up and do your work. Okay, those kinds of firms will spend more because you will hire a different kind of person, and you will not fill up the 8-10 hours a day with day-to-day practical firefighting and running around, but you'll actually prize something more. Then those are the firms that will get on these straight lines in semi-log graphs, and then those firms will just do unbelievably well in the long run.
These are all fantastic caveats. Again, there's a term called deliberate practice, coined by Anders Ericsson and popularized, I think, by Malcolm Gladwell in his books. And that speaks to the core of this, right? It is not just enough to do blindly like an automaton, like what you've described, but deliberate practice. You think about what you're doing, you think about your craft, you think about how you're getting the job done, and only then do you kind of improve. If you are a young boy who's gone to the nets to play cricket, you can have two approaches. One is you just go out there and for the half an hour of coaching, you just, hit the ball, don't really think about what you're doing. The other is, which works if you have a good coach, is that you are thinking about your footwork, about your elbow position, about the balance of the body, the stillness of the head. You're thinking about all of those, internalizing one quality at a time and moving on to the next level. That is critically important. And what you said about, businesses not going through the motions, that speaks to me of incentives, that it is not just about technology and human nature. It is also about what are the incentives that you put in place. And there's a stirring story that I'm reminded of. This story is about the hotel chain Ritz-Carlton. I first found this story on Twitter, a thread by Ben Wolf. We'll link to that. Ritz-Carlton in 1983 was led by this gentleman named Horst Schulze. And Schulze made a very interesting decision about the hotel. He said that from now on, every single employee of this hotel, from the highest to the lowest, will have the freedom to spend $2,000 of the hotel's money at their own discretion for a guest. So if you find a good way to spend $2,000 on a guest, just do it. You don't need to ask. There is no chain of command. You take the initiative, you spend the money, is perfectly fine. And Schulze's calculation was this, that the lifetime value of a regular guest at the Ritz-Carlton was $200,000. $2,000 was a very small amount of money to make people feel that this was their place. Many examples of this. Example number one, there's a gentleman who came to Atlanta, stayed in a hotel, flew to Hawaii, right? And when he reached Hawaii, he realized that he didn't have his laptop with him. He left it back at the Ritz in Atlanta. And now he was here in Hawaii and he had an important meeting and he absolutely had to have his laptop by the morning, right? So he called the Ritz. The employee he was speaking to said, I can send it to you. But then the employee spoke to FedEx or whoever the courier company was, realized it may not get there in time. So this employee took the laptop, booked a flight for himself, flew himself to Hawaii, gave the laptop to the gentleman and flew back because he had the discretion to do so. Another story. There's a family with a kid and the kid left Thomas the Tank Engine behind, right? He had this little tank engine. I won't call it a toy because why insult Thomas? So Thomas the Tank Engine was left behind at the hotel and the kid was distraught. And the parents called the hotel and he said that, we've left Thomas the Tank Engine behind. Is there a way to ship it back? Not only Ajay Shah did the Ritz-Carlton ship Thomas the Tank Engine back and make sure Thomas, got home in time, but they also sent photographs of Thomas the Tank Engine enjoying spa treatment at the hotel, so the kid would feel happy and he would feel that Thomas is well taken care of. Another example, a couple gathers in Cancun for a beach wedding, and while they're playing at the beach one particular day, the day before the wedding, they lose the wedding ring. All right, this is chaos. Everybody looks for it. They can't find the wedding ring. The couple goes back to the hotel and they're very sad and distraught, and the next morning is the wedding. What does the Ritz-Carlton do? The employee who is in charge of the search buys 4 metal detectors and gets the staff to work on the beach all night. They find the ring. When the couple wakes up for breakfast, they find that the ring has been given to them. Another excellent example, there is a bunch of people having a business dinner, and the server overhears them talking about this conference they're organizing at another hotel. So what he does is, he decides to comp the $600 dinner. And these people are so happy with that they shift the conference to this hotel and is held there every year from that time on. And this seems to me to be such a beautiful example that you fix the incentives, because employees who might otherwise go through the motions, you are sort of making them aware that, boss, you can show initiative. You can do something. And this is probably not directly attributable or measurable what you do with this, but I think it's beautiful. I remember many years back, in fact, I remember the year because that's the year my mother died in 2008. We heard that she died and we were flying back and we are at the airport, and one of us happened to mention at the counter that my mom is dead, and they gave us a free upgrade to business class. Right? And this person had no need to do that at that moment. She is just a person working, a dumb desk job at a whatever, but somehow she just used her discretion, gave us an upgrade to business class. I thought it's beautiful. I thought I am going to fly this airline forever. I think it was Jet, no longer exists, but that's how it was. So I think even people who run firms need to think about this, that one, you keep the people with the tacit knowledge. Like when you, spoke about tacit knowledge disappearing, I was reminded of what happened to your pensions policy community, and why the new pension scheme went to hell. Gentle listeners, we have a great episode on pensions, which is a masterclass. You should listen to that. Exactly the same thing. And all you got to do to look after this stuff is be aware of it as someone running a firm, that I want to make my employees feel that sense of ownership so that we get that straight line on a log graph. Ajay, to me, this is not just a technology story, it's also a great free market story, right? And I think of Leonard Reed's great essay, I Pencil, about how a humble pencil requires the coordination of millions of people across many, many countries. But it doesn't happen through a central planner, which would frankly be impossible. But it happens through the price system and through the workings of the market. And there's a similar beauty playing out in this entire story around Moore's laws. So take me through some of that.
Yeah. So iPencil does not hold a candle to iCPU. If you think of the array of madness that has to happen all over the world to make a CPU, it is just staggering. There are machines being made by a firm like ASML, which in turn relies on hundreds of suppliers to create, arguably the most complex machines in the earth today are made in Holland by the company ASML. And there are software systems built by basically American firms. There are top 3 American firms who do the software that is used to design CPUs. There are 10, 20, 30,000 skilled individuals in Bangalore who sit as employees of global firms and do CPU design work. There are the great firms like ARM and Apple and Intel who build CPUs. There's just hundreds of firms who come together to do all this. Now, whenever you get a complex industry like this, there is a problem of coordination of investment. That if I'm a firm and I run ahead and I do my tiny piece very well and I'm ready in 18 months with something much superior, what if the others are not? Okay, so you have a coordination problem, and many people may run to the conclusion that so you need a government, and the government will coerce people. It will force the guy making hyper pure nickel that next year you need to be ready with a factory where there is so much quantity of so much purity of nickel, so that the user of the nickel is sitting in this other factory, right? This is classic Mahalanobis kind of thinking, that the government will coerce many people, and to bring all those pieces together, then they are all available and you've solved the coordination problem of the market economy. But there is no such thing, and there is no government playing this role in the global semiconductor industry. And yeah, there are industry associations, they talk with each other, they use words like roadmap, they try to talk to each other. But it is impossible to overemphasize the role of Moore's law as the organizing principle. That people just signed up for the religion. It is a religion, it is not a physical law. It is an economic law. It is not based on any reason. Like, how are you going to innovate in the next 18 months has never been clear. Every few years, there has been a demise of the Moore's law because the old approach that was being taken maxed out and it stopped. And then there were very smart people who said, you know, we're stuck. It's like, how are we going to do this? Guys, wake up. Moore's law is in deep trouble. It's going to stall now. Human ingenuity won again and again and again. And why did that happen? Because all across hundreds of different firms, they all just took on a near religious belief that in about 18 months, we need a doubling of the number of transistors, and that will need this, that will need this, that will need this. So let me take the risk. I will run ahead and build this. And there is no better example than ASML. ASML was the pioneer in extreme ultraviolet lithography. Okay, 10 years ahead of time, projecting through Moore's law, they saw the problem that conventional lithography was not going to work. And you needed to go to extreme ultraviolet, which I think is like 13.5 nanometer wavelength. And nobody knew how to do this. And there were severe physics problems in getting there. But these people had that Moore's law assurance, like that's the closest you get to an assurance that if we crack this, we will be doing something seriously cool. And it turned out that this stuff was very hard. And all the other firms who tried this stuff actually failed. And ASML got through. And they had years and years and years of investment well ahead of time. Because 10 years ahead of time, they could see that the conventional technologies of lithography are going to max out and you're going to need XUV. And we are just going to dedicate ourselves to building XUV well ahead of time. So Moore's law has this very interesting idea that it's a bit of a self-fulfilling prophecy. It became a coordination mechanism by hundreds of firms who then were able to move in a more synchronous way. Otherwise, all through the history of technology, we do get this problem that there is some early pioneer that comes in, does something very cool, but you know, the market is not ready, the users are not ready, or I needed 10 other suppliers to be ready and I couldn't make money even though I was the innovator. And I want to go one level beyond semiconductor manufacturing to think of user technologies. The clever people thinking of applications of CPUs, of applications like these mobile phones, like think of the applications of the AI. If you look at today's expenditures on AI, they're outrageous. It is nuts. I mean, the amount of electricity, the amount of capital that goes in to make either the training data centers or the inference at the edge, it is just outrageous. It is not making money. It is hugely expensive today. What many people are doing is they are just promising themselves that the innovations will come, the cost gains will come. There will be a straight line in a semi-log graph where the training cost will come down dramatically, the inference cost will come down dramatically. Like, don't worry, just be sure that those gains are coming. Now close your eyes and dream. That's the glory of Moore's law. The users were told, close your eyes and dream. All this magic is going to happen. What would you do in that world? You literally have to be a science fiction writer to dream that world, to imagine that world. Come, let's do it. Again and again through the last 50 years. And like right now around AI chips and AI applications, that's what everybody is being challenged to do. That yeah, today it's infeasible. Today it's not economical. Today the API call for the Google Gemini is like 7 cents per call. That's like 50 paisa per call. And most Indian mobile phone applications where you would do something cool using that AI are not viable if you're going to have to pay 50 paisa per API call to Google. But if you look at this today, you'll never innovate. You have to think that 50 paisa will go to 5 paisa, will go to 0.5 paisa. Okay, you're going to get those gains. And it is your job today to sit and dream that what would you do when these calls are 0.05 paisa. So Moore's law has played that very powerful role in coordination and technological coordination across large numbers of different buyers, sellers, equipment vendors, and so on. And I want to generalize this, that there's a little bit of a hype around Moore's law, but the moment I phrase it as Wright's law, and I show you a paper where we've seen this in 62 different technologies, then straight lines and semi-log graphs is not just about CPUs and is not just about electronics, but it's actually happening in so many different industries. We talked about a few: the cost of DNA sequencing, the cost of putting 1 kg into near Earth orbit, the cost of a solar panel, the cost of lithium-ion batteries, and so on. So it's not true that it happens everywhere, but we should wake up. Our eyes should learn to spot straight lines in semi-log graphs.
And what I find miraculous about this is not just that it is important for Moore's law to exist, but it is important for the articulation of it to exist. Because that articulation leads to this dream that everyone can share, to this common belief that then makes them act in a way that appears coordinated but isn't. But they're all acting on the common belief that yes, we will progress, and yes, all of this will fall into place and all of this happen. The same with Wright's law. It's great that it exists, but more than the fact that it exists means, what I like about it is the articulation of it, so people can think about it and plan their lives accordingly.
So Amit, I'm finished with my main story. We have introduced Moore's law. We have generalized it to Moore's laws. We've gone beyond into Wright's law and Goddard's law. And so now we are thinking about technological progress more generally. We've thought about this as a coordination mechanism for large numbers of players in iPencil. Okay, that's a beautiful story about the world and understanding for the world. What do you think?
So I have two themes I want to quickly talk about, and one of them is that this is not for me just a technology story, it's a humanity story. Like, the core truth about human beings is that we are innovative, that we can innovate endlessly. As the title of one of our previous episodes mentioned, people are brains, not stomachs. And one field in which I kind of see this is just energy. Right? At energy, throughout our history, at different points in time, we have reached a phase where people have said that, oh shit, our main energy source is going to hell, we are screwed. For example, there was a time centuries ago where wood from forests was a main source of energy. But then as you had deforestation and the wood began to grow scarce, the prices went up, people are like, what do we do? And voila, you have the next big innovation, which is coal mines. And even there you reach a natural sort of limit, but then the industrial revolution happens and the technology gets much better, the extractive technology, and then there are transportation technologies in terms of what happens with the railways and so on and so forth. And then that takes off. A lot of people don't realize the importance of whales to energy. Whale oil was once a key source for lighting up homes, right? And the whole game was whale oil. How can we get more whale oil? And what was the kind of technology being innovated in those times to pursue this particular end? Better ships. You need better ships that will chase whales faster, that will hunt whales faster. How do you extract maximum oil per whale? How do you store it so that it survives? These are all the technologies your mind is going into. There was obviously overfishing of whales or over whaling or whatever the term is. And as that scarcity happened, again, that miraculous mechanism of the market and of society comes into play, and you have prices, higher prices. We need to innovate. What do? We move on to fossil fuels. And for a moment, I'm not even talking about the environmental impact, because that is not something that was known then. And as we became aware of it, today we find more and more technologies coming up, which I am confident will take us away from fossil fuels as well. We had a great episode, I love, on nuclear energy, where we spoke about that. We had an episode on the future of electricity where you spoke about renewables. So I'm confident that we will solve this problem because we innovate endlessly. And this basic fact about human beings, I don't think is recognized enough. In our episode on population, we spoke about the bet between Paul Ehrlich and Julian Simon. Julian Simon was a great economist who found Paul Ehrlich's Malthusian claims ridiculous. Ehrlich essentially said, hey, the population keeps going up, the resources are the same, we're going to run out of everything. At one point in the early 70s, he said Britain will be extinct by 2000. He said by the end of this decade, half of India will starve. And Julian Simon was like, no, hold on, man. We are innovative, we are creative, that is a core of progress. And the two of them made a wager in 1980 that over 10 years we will track 5 materials chosen by Ehrlich. and then we will see if the price goes up or down, and then the wager will be settled. And Julian Simon won for all 5 of those things. But if the population is going up, Ehrlich's simplistic Malthusian wrong thinking would predict that the prices will go up, but instead all of them went down because we kept innovating, we kept doing funky things. So, part of my story is about the power of innovation. The second theme I want to elaborate upon is that humans are incredible at maximizing within their constraints. As you lift those constraints, as those boundaries expand, as capacity expands, humans will innovate and fill that space. I'm reminded, in this episode in the last, we spoke about my misadventures of 2000. I was not the only one misadventuring. At that time, more than $100 billion were invested by big companies in laying fiber optic cables throughout America because they thought, oh, the boom is just going to continue like this and we need a lot of fiber optic. Well, guess what happened? The crash happens, the dot-com bust happens, and 90% of that fiber optic capacity was not being used. And people said, oh, what a waste, companies went under, etc., etc. That, oh, what a waste, less than 10% of it is being used. But was it a waste? What happened was, because the capacity existed, not that it can be taken for granted as appearing in the future, but it actually already existed there. And innovators came in. The growth of what happened in broadband, what happened in mobile telephony, which to some extent depends on those, what happened in cloud computing. All of it was made possible to the extent that today 80 to 90% of that capacity is used, and it was made possible because of the fact that once the capacity existed, we used our innovation in different ways. I often go back to the role that and this was all, private entrepreneurs laying fiber optics and making their losses a creative destruction of the economy, all very healthy. But I also think of the state doing things that I may not necessarily approve of, like deep space science and all of that, but having, benefits later on down the line because they expanded the boundaries. You look at GPS, made for military purposes, made for space purposes, and now we are all using it. My pizza gets to me on time because Swiggy and Zomato are using, though this is possibly a bug and not a feature. But you get what I'm saying. We use it every day in various ways and we take it for granted, and it evolved for something else. But it was created and then our imagination took over and put it to use. And I just find that so wonderful. And there are a million examples of that, like memory foam pillows, were created for outer space for use in spacecraft in those kind of environments. And today we are randomly using it at home. So a lot of the beautiful technology around us, so for me, this whole story is about human creativity. That's what we are celebrating here. The technology is downstream of that.
Yeah. I, for one, have made mistakes in understanding the world because of the inability to see some of these gains. When I look back in life, I vividly was there at the dawn of the digital camera revolution. At the time, I was a hardcore analog camera photographer. Okay, so I was shooting Kodachrome and Ektachrome with Nikon cameras and loving the slides that were getting made. And it felt like the digital stuff was so shabby, it was so far, meaning the computer engineer part of me like totally loved the convenience of having files as opposed to owning slides. Okay, and that message is loud and clear. But the early digital equipment was so shabby and so far from what was good quality that it just seemed insuperable. So quick calculations at the time showed that you needed about 12 megapixels of an image, and you needed certain technical characteristics at each pixel. The human fovea at the center of the retina is the most sophisticated piece of imaging equipment. It is like it plays at 10,000 dots per inch. So when you focus and you see something intently in the center of your eye, the resolving power of the eye is unbelievable, and digital stuff just felt so far away from that. And I failed to see that, look, you just have to give it 10-20 years and these gaps will be overcome. Similarly, lithium ion storage. I am a great enthusiast around renewables, around storage, around batteries. Ayush Patnaik and I have spent many evenings only discussing dreams of batteries. We just love batteries inordinately. But I just did not see that there was a straight line in a semi-log graph for a long time. And the miracles that are possible today with lithium-ion batteries were things that came to me as a bit of a surprise. So I would like to say to everybody, that humans are not good at exponential thinking. That by default, you, gentle reader, are probably not appreciating the possibilities and the power of straight lines and semilog graphs. And I'd like to say it in two different ways. That if you are a person making something, if you are a firm, then think about Wright's law. Make those graphs where you're putting volume on the x-axis, aggregate lifetime production on the x-axis, and some productivity metrics on the y-axis in log scale. And if you don't have a Wright's law where there are gains, very crudely a thumb rule of 20% productivity gain for each doubling in the volume or something, that are you getting a semi-log straight line? If not, something is wrong with your organization, something is wrong with your culture. Okay, that you need to change course so that you create that learning environment, that experimentation environment, that sense of trying things and making progress, as opposed to dumbly doing execution work. Okay, this is one wing of the room, that Wright's law is not preordained, it is not given to you for free. It comes out of your purposive choices. When we build good firms, when we think and work in a more purposive way, we will harness some Wright's law style phenomenon. And it's our job to do it, to find those ways in which we get really good at things, we as individuals, we as firms. And then it is our job to look at the world and constantly look for these straight lines in semilog graphs, because they are happening all around us and we ignore them at our peril. And then we should always be flipping around and saying, you know what, there is a Wright's law burning in this industry, and what would I do with it?
Very wise words. In the last episode, we spoke about, the second big move by Netflix, when in 2007 they embraced streaming at a time where the bandwidth wasn't there and the displays weren't good enough. And it just seemed like crazy. You could have made the same mistake you made in digital, that, oh, the technology is so crappy, what's the point? But what I would implore young entrepreneurs to do, as a failed middle-aged entrepreneur myself, is make for the future. Don't make for today. Today will be an artifact by the time 24 hours are over, and your company will be dead in the water. Make for the future. Imagine 5 years from now, which is actually impossible to do because so many unknowns, technology is growing so far. But imagine that 5 years from now, when you wake up in the morning, what are you doing? How are you spending your time? And try to imagine that world, which is not bound by the constraints of today, either of cost or of technological capacity or whatever, and make for that world. And if you make for that world today, you will succeed.
Amit bhai, give us a recommendation today.
So I'll give you a recommendation which should be close to your heart. I don't know, but first I want to ask you a question. Does Susan have brown eyes?
Little bit.
Little bit brown, right? So there's a song by Van Morrison called Brown Eyed Girl,
Yeah.
which has the line going down to the old mine with a transistor radio, right? So do you remember in the 70s and 80s, we would call a portable radio a transistor, which was of course a short form. And at that age, as a little kid, I didn't know ki transistor matlab is not, the radio is not called a transistor, it's a transistor radio. And we have short formed it. But I don't want to recommend this song. It's kind of a cheesy pop song, which is like really early in his career. But I'll recommend two great albums, Astral Weeks and Moondance, which are both simply masterpieces. I might even have spoken about them before on this show. For Astral Weeks, what happened was that when he wrote this bunch of songs, he got together to record it with musicians he was not familiar with. He took a couple of musicians with him to the studio. They were quickly sacked by the producer. The producer had his own ideas and doing things. He got his own crew in. One of them was this great bassist called Richard Davis. So it was almost as if he was playing and singing the song on the guitar, but what was happening apart from that was something he was not in control of, and it was a bunch of jazz guys improvising. And the result is an absolute masterpiece. Deeply moving songs. I will also link in the show notes to two great versions of Madam George, the iconic song of that album by Marianne Faithfull and Luca Bloom. Great versions as well. So a great album. And Van Morrison initially wasn't too happy with it because it didn't turn out as he had planned. So he had a mental image in his head. But over time, he came to realize it was a masterpiece, so much so that if I remember correctly, 30 years later, he toured with Richard Davis again as his bassist, and he wanted Davis to play it exactly as he had played it on the album. And Davis said, "No, you fucker, I'm a jazz player. I'll do something different each time." Something to this effect. There's a great podcast episode that I had heard on Astral Weeks, which I will link from the show notes. And the second album is a great R&B album called Moondance. Like Astral Weeks came out in 1968. Moondance was, I think, circa 1970. And this is Van Morrison with his own band doing things exactly as he wants to do, R&B classics in the traditional way. And this is, again, just a great, great album. Every song is great. I could take another hour just talking about it, so I won't do that. But this I recommend from you. Brown Eyed Girl, of course, predates this, but it contains both a brown-eyed girl like your Susan and transistor radios, which I know today that you love so much.
What was the killer app of the bad old days? So, Namsita, can you imagine people walking around the streets with like 10 centimeter by 5 centimeter by 3 centimeter objects glued into their ear? What do you think they were doing? Cricket commentary.
Yeah. And it's very interesting that a lot of people, their memories of cricket are shaped by what they heard someone talk about. So when they'll talk about Sunil Gavaskar ki straight drive, Marshall ko aise mara, Pancho, they didn't even see it. You've heard a version and then your brain has concocted what must have happened, and then later you retrofit it into the new footage that you see circa mid-80s and all of that.